Practical Anarchy, a guide to self-determination, Dickie Dread. And please bear with me today, I've got a bit of a hangover because it was my birthday last night. But here goes. Section 34, Wage Slavery. If Chapter 4 unpicked how the state secures power through violence and division, then Chapter 5 turns to its twin accomplice, capitalism. One of its ugliest masks is wage slavery. The phrase might sound dramatic, but it captures a simple truth. The selling of labour is not freedom. It is compulsion dressed up in contracts. Workers may not wear chains, but they are bound by rent, bills, mortgages, and the threat of hunger. In this sense, wage labour is less about choice and more about survival. As Dave Graeber pointed out, the vast majority of people in capitalist societies spend their lives doing tasks they would never choose if their basic needs were already met. From enclosure to factory. Historically, labour became commodified for enclosure and dispossession. Peasants who once had access to common land were forced off it and pushed into factories. This transformation was not voluntary, it was imposed by law and violence. Marx described it as primitive accumulation, the theft of common resources that left the majority with nothing to sell but their labour. For anarchists, this moment was not just the birth of capitalism, but the creation of a new form of slavery, waged instead of chattel. Alienation and the loss of meaning. Alienation compounds the insult. Under wage labour, workers do not control what they produce, how they produce it, or the purpose of their labour. The product is whisked away, the process dictated by bosses, and the meaning drained from the work. A carpenter might once have built furniture for the village. Under capitalism, they bolt the same screw into the same frame all day for a multinational chain. Marx's diagnosis of alienation remains powerful, but anarchists push further. The problem is not just capitalism, it's the whole hierarchical system that makes one person's survival depend on another's domination. The illusion of freedom in the job market. The job market, meanwhile, pretends to be a space of choice. Politicians love to talk about opportunity and freedom, as if workers float between careers the way festival goers choose between food stalls. In reality, most workers take whatever job will pay enough to keep a roof over their heads. The so-called flexible labour market often means insecurity, 0 hours contracts, and the erosion of any collective protection. The illusion of freedom masks the reality of dependence. Everyday examples. Take the modern warehouse worker. In Amazon fulfillment centres, employees walk 10 miles a shift. Their movements tracked by handheld scanners and algorithms. They are penalised for bathroom breaks, pushed back to pack hundreds of items an hour, and judged by a machine that dictates their pace. Officially, they are free. They can quit at any time. But in practice, most stay because rent is due and bills must be paid. The wage is the leash. Or take the Deliveroo rider zigzagging through city traffic. They provide their own bike, risk injury, and often earn less than minimum wage once costs are deducted. Yet the app tells them they are independent contractors, entrepreneurs in the gig economy. In truth, they are workers without rights, disposable and replaceable. These examples show that wage slavery is not a relic of the Industrial Revolution, but the lived reality of millions every day. Minimum wage, migrant exploitation and low pay. Governments defend wage labour by pointing to the minimum wage as proof that workers are protected. But minimum wages are often set below the level required for a decent life. In the UK, campaigners highlight the gap between the government's national minimum wage and the higher real living wage, calculated by independent bodies such as the Living Wage Foundation. Many workers, cleaners, carers, hospitality staff, survive on legal wages that still leave them dependent on food banks. In the US, the long fight for the $15 federal minimum, led by the Fight for $15 movement, was dragged on for over a decade, with many states still stuck at $7.25 an hour, unchanged since 2009. Even where wages rise, employers cut hours or benefits, clawing back what they appear to concede. Migrants are particularly vulnerable. Many work long hours for below the legal minimum, fearful of deportation or blacklisting if they complain. Agricultural labour in southern Europe, garment shops in the UK, or care work across the US and Canada all rely on this structural exploitation. The minimum wage becomes not a safeguard but a benchmark for how little can be paid while still keeping the system intact. Recent data underlines how serious low pay is in the UK. In 2024, around 7.5 million jobs, that's 15.7% of all the jobs, were paid below the real living wage, up from 13% in 2023. Around 1.9 million workers, about 6.5% of the workforce, were paid at or below the legal minimum wage. Nearly half of care workers in England earn less than a real living wage, and in London, around 80% of care staff fall below the London rate. Automation and the threat of redundancy. At the same time, automation looms over every workplace. Self-checkouts replace shop workers, algorithms manage logistics, and artificial intelligence now threatens to displace not just manual labour but white-collar jobs in law, medicine and media. Politicians tell workers to retrain, but the truth is harsher. Capitalism has no loyalty to labour. If profit can be made without workers, workers are cast aside. The examples are everywhere. Dock workers who once loaded ships were decimated by containerisation in the mid-20th century. Whole communities around ports collapsed as cranes and standardised containers replaced human labour. More recently, Uber has poured billions of pounds into self-driving car projects, openly admitting that replacing drivers is part of its long-term plan, even as it continues to rely on them under contractor status. Call centres in India, the Philippines and elsewhere face AI systems that can take over customer service roles. Creative industries see algorithms generating content once considered human. In the UK, studies suggest serious exposure. How exposed are UK jobs to generative AI? Shows clearly all jobs have some exposure to AI. Digital tools. Job postings in high exposure roles have already dropped by around 6.5% since the release of ChatGPT. The Institute for Public Policy Research warns that up to 8 million UK jobs could be lost to AI automation, disproportionately in entry-level, administrative and part-time roles, especially among the lower paid workers, younger people and women. The TUC found that half of UK adults already fear AI will take or change their job, with the figure rising to 62% among 25 to 34-year-olds. Globally, forecasts are equally stark. A US-based MIT report estimates that 1.6 to 3.2 million workers could lose their jobs over the next 2 decades due to AI, while analysts suggest that 50 to 60% of jobs worldwide could be transformed or automated by 2040. Marx foresaw this in his Grundrisse, where he argued that automation could free workers from toil, but under capitalism would instead deepen exploitation. The contradiction remains stark. Automation could shorten the working week, liberate people from drudgery, or abolish wage labour entirely. Instead, it becomes another whip, a threat to keep wages down, a tool to shed jobs, a reminder that workers are disposable. For anarchists, this is decisive. Technology shows that moneyless society... I live in a part of Wales where military aircraft go past and make a hell of a row. Lovely, isn't it? Where was I? Right, for anarchists, this is decisive. Technology shows that a moneyless society of abundance is possible, yet the wage system keeps people shackled to scarcity. Why wage slavery matters. Colin Ward argued that most significant feature of wage slavery is its invisibility. Because workers receive money rather than lashes, they believe themselves free. but in practice the jobs are structured by compulsion, just as rigid as any feudal chain. You can walk out of a job, yes, but you cannot walk out of the system. Rent and hunger will follow you. Anarchists have always insisted that liberation means more than better wages or safer contracts. It means breaking the system that makes survival dependent on selling one's life by the hour. For this reason, anarchist movements built cooperatives, communes and federations of workers where labour could be directed toward needs rather than profit. Kropotkin's vision of fields, factories and workshops was not nostalgia for pre-industrial life, but a radical blueprint for decentralised production where work could be creative, social and free. The phrase wage slavery matters because it punctures the myth of the job market. It reminds us that what is sold is not product, but human time, the hours of life that could have been spent differently. And once we see wage labour for what it is, coerced survival, not free choice, then the rest of capitalism's illusions start to crumble. Holidays and weekends as controlled time. Capitalism offers the illusion of freedom not just through wages, but also through time. The invention of the weekend and the holiday as distinct categories of life appears to grant respite, yet in practice it reinforces the very divisions on which slave slavery depends. By separating work time from free time, the system ensures that most people live two parallel lives, one constrained by labour, the other squeezed into evenings, weekends and a few weeks each year. Historically, the weekend is not a natural feature of human society, but a negotiated concession wrested by trade unions and labour movements in the 19th and 20th centuries. What began as a small reduction in the working week became normalised as a rigid divide. Yet rather than liberating, this structure channels leisure into predictable cycles of consumption, shopping on Saturdays, recovery on Sundays, package holidays designed to sell the same experience to millions. Far from undermining capitalism, time off became a lucrative sector of the economy. This temporal discipline is visible in the holiday industry itself. Travel companies, airlines and hotel chains profit from the promise of escape, while reinforcing dependence on wages to buy the temporary freedom. The annual holiday becomes a ritualised pressure valve, a way to release discontent without ever questioning the structure that makes such release necessary. The same logic applies to weekends, where consumer patterns are highly predictable and marketed aggressively. Another anarchist practices, by contrast, challenge the split between work and life. For travellers and ravers, life is not divided into 5 days of labour, followed by 2 days of consumption, but lived as a continuum of making, moving, celebrating and surviving. Similarly, off-grid communities often blur distinctions between labour and leisure. Growing food, repairing structures and cooking meals collectively are simultaneously work and life. This refusal of the weekend as a controlled category exposes how deeply time itself has been commodified. For anarchism, the lesson is clear. Genuine freedom cannot be measured in hours off the clock or holidays earned. Until the system that separates life into work and leisure is dismantled, weekdays and holidays will remain a managed illusion, a simulation of the liberation that keeps the deeper chains intact. Tourism and its consequences. If holidays and weekends are the managed slices of freedom within working life, then tourism is the global extension of that logic. Entire industries exist to sell escape, packaging leisure as a commodity to be bought rather than lived. From budget airlines to luxury cruises, the promise is the same: step outside everyday life, pay for the privilege, then return to work refreshed enough to endure it again. The consequences are profound. Tourism has become one of the largest sectors of the global economy, but it thrives on inequality. Cheap flights depend on poorly paid workers, deregulated airports and subsidies for fossil fuels. Resorts often displace local people or lock them into seasonal precarious labour. Cruise ships float as tax havens, leaving pollution in their wake while funneling profits to distant corporations. The marketing of exotic destinations commodifies cultures, reducing histories and communities to backdrops for tourist consumption. Environmental costs are stark. Air travel alone accounts for an ever-rising share of global carbon emissions. Fragile ecosystems are eroded by human tourism, beaches destroyed, mountains scarred, entire cities hollowed out by short-term lets. Even state-led solutions, from nature reserves to UNESCO heritage sites, often reproduce the same dynamic. Conservation framed as spectacle for visitors rather than stewardship by local communities. Yet tourism also shows the cracks. Community-led and ecotourism projects offer glimpses of another logic, travel rooted in exchange, learning and solidarity rather than profit. Indigenous groups have organised tours that challenge stereotypes and channel resources into their own stewardship of the land. Grassroots experiments with low-impact travel, walking festivals, cycle tours, hospitality networks like couch surfing highlight how leisure and movement need not reproduce the violence of mass tourism. For anarchists, the issue is not whether people should travel. Movement and exchange are human joys, and as will be argued later on free movement, borders should often eclipsing urgent political and social issues. No, sorry. Borders should be marks on maps, not barriers with guns. Told you I had a hangover. The question is whether tourism remains another arm of capitalism, capitalist consumption, or becomes an expression of shared freedom. Just as we can reject the false split between work and weekend, so we can reclaim travel as connection rather than exploitation. Case study: the myth of royalty as a tourism revenue. In the UK, defenders of monarchy often justify its existence on economic grounds. Without royalty, they argue, the nation would lose billions of pounds in tourism revenue. The claim is repeated so often it is hardened into common sense, yet the evidence tells a different story. Research from the UK Parliament and independent think tanks shows that most tourists visit Britain for its history, culture and institutions, museums, landscapes, pubs and festivals, not for fleeting glimpses of royalty. Visitors to Buckingham Palace or Windsor Castle are not drawn by who happens to live inside. They're drawn by the buildings, the stories and the symbolism. Republic, the anti-monarchy campaign group, points out that France, which executed its royal family more than 2 centuries ago, attracts more tourists to the Versailles each year than Buckingham Palace does in a decade. If royalty were the decisive factor, countries without monarchs would lag far behind in visitor numbers. Instead, France, the US, Italy and Spain consistently top global tourist rankings. The royalty pays for itself line also obscures the cost of maintaining the monarchy, which runs into hundreds of millions of pounds annually, once security, estates and subsidies are included. As with broader tourism industry, the economic story is less about prosperity for all and about prestige, spectacle and the concentration of wealth. For anarchists, the debate misses the point. Even if royalty did generate significant income, it would still embody hierarchy, privilege and hereditary power, precisely the structures that the rest of this book has critiqued. Just as green capitalism offers a false solution to ecological crisis, the argument that monarchy is justified because it's good for tourism confuses spectacle with substance. Visitors do not need unelected heads of state to marvel at castles, architecture and history. Case study: monarchies in name only. Even when monarchies no longer wield direct political power, their presence is far from harmless. Constitutional monarchies such as the UK, Spain, the Netherlands and Sweden are often defended as merely symbolic. Their defenders argue that royalty today does not interfere with governance, that they exist simply as living history or harmless pageantry. Yet symbols matter. Symbols shape how people imagine society, how they conceive authority, and how they accept hierarchy as natural. To keep monarchs as figureheads is to keep alive the story that some are born above others, and that the order is to be celebrated. This is not only about tourism myths, already dismantled above. It's about propaganda, the soft power of tradition. Royal weddings, jubilees and coronations flood media channels, often eclipsing urgent political and social issues. These spectacles project stability, continuity and obedience, even as inequality deepens. The monarch becomes a screen onto which people project loyalty to the system itself, A society that tolerates such pageantry risks embedding hierarchy in its very culture, long after the material basis of monarchy has eroded. The effect is amplified in education and media. School textbooks and children's programs present kings and queens as benign fixtures of history, glossing over colonial violence and class struggle. The national anthem itself in the UK, pledging allegiance to the monarch, is a ritual reminder of fealty. In Spain, debates over Catalan and Basque separatism repeatedly evoke loyalty to the crown, showing that monarchy, even in name only, still function as a political anchor. Far from being neutral, these symbols continue to legitimise central authority against movements for autonomy. Cross-referencing back to the section on the illusion of democracy, monarchy provides another layer of theatre. Just as elections channel dissent into managed participation, royalty channels cultural identity into reverence for hierarchy. And as we will see later, when discussing culture and creativity, the presence of state-sponsored pageantry overshadows grassroots traditions and community celebrations that embody real collective life. The innocence of symbolic monarchy thus obscures its function as soft propaganda. What would an anarchist alternative look like? Abolishing the institution outright is only part of the answer. It also requires demythologising the symbols, showing that the monarch is not a magical figure who embodies the nation, but a person propped up by vast resources, inherited wealth, and orchestrated publicity. Removing monarchy means not only redistributing the crown estates, but also reclaiming cultural space from royal spectacle. Festivals, carnivals, and communal rituals can provide joy and cohesion without hierarchy, without bowing to a bloodline. Ultimately, to accept monarchies in name only is to keep one more mask in place. Another reminder that inequality is natural, and that we should admire those who live above us. As we will argue later, capitalism constantly invents new disguises. Monarchy stripped of power, but wrapped in ceremony, remains one of its most resilient.